Hi, I'm Peggy Perry, and I'm going to show you how to make a traditional pumpkin pie today. And I thank my cameraman, who is my husband, Bob. I'm going to be showing you a recipe that's quite traditional, passed down from my mother. And you can see my mother was a baker, and here she is making Christmas cookies with our son Ryan about 30 years ago. And the recipe I use is very much based on what's in the old traditional Betty Crocker cookbook, which may look familiar to some of you. You can see it's very well used on my part. So we start with about a cup of flour and a half teaspoon of salt. And I've combined this thoroughly with a whisk because you want to be sure to have that salt combined throughout. Salt's really important for pie crust because it really enhances the flavor. Every bite of pie has some crust in it, so you want that salty, well-salted crust to be part of that flavor profile, whether it's a sweet filling or maybe a more savory sweet like pumpkin. So the next thing that we do is add our fat, and I use just regular Crisco. You can use other kinds of fat, butter, cream cheese, other recipes, but I tend to like using Crisco because of its reliable results. And this is 1/3 of a cup, and you can see I put it in here. Now this step is a pretty important one. It's incorporating the fat into the flour, and I use my fingers. Some people like using a pastry cutter or even 2 knives, but I tend to find I can really tell the condition of the flour and the Crisco mixed together really well with my fingers. Now this is important. The fat mixed in with the flour is what creates the flakiness. It allows for when the pie crust bakes, the fat melts and it creates pockets and layers within the pastry, and that's what makes it flaky and light. You want to do this quickly because you don't want the fat to melt with your warm fingertips, so you do this very quickly. Pastry cutters, of course, may take care of that, but I just prefer using my fingers. And this way I can feel where everything is combined. You want it to look sort of mealy, almost like cornmeal in a way when you're done. So this is what it will look like. And then the final ingredient for the crust will be water, and I use ice water. This really takes me back to my mother that would have this little dish of ice water. We're going to add 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. You want the water to be cold because you want to keep that fat from melting again. And so you mix it up to where it sort of comes together in a bit of a ball. You don't want to add too much water, you get a very soggy crust, but just enough to make the flour pretty much come together. And now we're ready to roll out the pastry. So we have our dough rounded into a ball and put onto a piece of wax paper with just a little bit of flour sprinkled on it first, and make it into somewhat of a disc shape. Now some cooks that I watch on the Food Network, they will now wrap this and put it in the refrigerator to chill it further, which is certainly something you can do, but I'm working pretty quickly here, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and roll it at this point. And so I'm going to use a second piece of wax paper to go on top because I find it can be tricky even with one of those socks that you can put on a rolling pin. It seems like I often find that the sticking is really a difficulty. So this is going to be a 9-inch pie crust that we will fill with our pumpkin filling. And so we want to roll it out as evenly as we can. And a good way to see if we've got what we need is to use our pie plate as a bit of a measure. So I'm just going to do a little bit more. Now, from my own experience and hearing from a lot of people, this is the crucial step because it's getting this sort of misshapen disc of dough, flattened out pastry dough, into that dish that can be somewhat intimidating. And so that's where I find that the wax paper is helpful to give us at least no grief getting it unstuck that way. So fold it over one time and then a second, and place it into your pan and just sort of adjust and ease it in there. And there we go. So sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, the edge isn't even and so on. Don't worry about that. That's where the patch technique comes in. And this dough is pretty pliable, pretty easily used to patch, and just press in with your fingers so that you wind up having a relatively even edge. There's always a little extra on one side. You can borrow that over. And as you're doing that, you can crimp it into place on the edge. Now I use this pie crust for everything, creature of habit, so even if I'm making something like a quiche or a tomato cheese tart, I will use this same pastry. But I wanted to give a shout out to my sister-in-law Marilyn, who taught me a really cool technique when you're making like an egg-based quiche type pie with this pastry. Add some caraway seed, about a scant tablespoonful, right when you add the water, and mix it in. And that's really a nice flavor that goes along with whatever your egg and quiche ingredients are. But this one can be used for that. There are sweet pastry doughs for certain desserts, but this one's a little more, I guess, versatile. So now I'm crimping with my fingers to give it a nice edge. And we have this just about ready to go. Now, if you were going to be baking this pie shell first, which is what you would do if you were making a lemon meringue pie or a fruit filling like a fresh strawberry pie, you would want a baked pie shell. And so you would use a fork to prick it all over, sides and bottom, so that when you bake it, it puffs up nicely, but you don't get any misshapen areas. I personally have never really had a need for pie weights, but that's what those are supposed to help with. I'm not into a lot of kitchen gadgets, so I just do that process, and it seems to work. So right now I'm going to put this in the refrigerator momentarily so that, again, the fats in there can really chill up while I get ready to prepare the pumpkin pie filling. So now we're ready to make our pie filling, and we're going to use it, we're going to make it using pumpkin pie, canned pumpkin pie. Now the first thing to know is that this says 100% pure pumpkin, but it actually isn't. The commercial pumpkin that Libby's cans is really made from a type of squash that has been developed to be very productive and also to create that smooth, very nice texture that you can see here. I've emptied the can already. If you ever have made a pie or eaten a pie made from actual pumpkins, you know, they're called pie pumpkins, they are delicious, but they have a very different texture. They're pretty fibrous-y, not nearly as smooth and creamy. My brother Mick swears by Hubbard squashes. That's what he makes his pumpkin pies out of, but they do have a lot more sort of a grainy type of texture. Very good flavor though. But I'm making something that is reliable, that I can count on year after year, and so I'm using the canned pumpkin that actually isn't pumpkin, but it tastes very good. So we already have that in our mixer bowl. We are going to add a mixture here of the dry ingredients, and this is a combination of sugar and spices that I've already stirred up. So we have a 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, we have a teaspoon of cinnamon, a half teaspoon of ginger, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves in here. And so we'll be adding those. We add 2 eggs, And what I'm going to do off camera, because you don't need to hear the mixer going, I'm going to add the 2 eggs first to get them combined with pumpkin. And then I'm going to add the dry ingredients till they're fully incorporated. You can usually tell by the color because the cloves and cinnamon darken the pumpkin. It gets a deeper rust color. And then the last thing I'm going to add is a can of evaporated milk. Evaporated milk is made from simply removing about almost half the water from milk and then heating it so that it gets a more caramelized appearance and flavor. And so we use that not sweetened condensed milk, which has sugar added. We got plenty of sugar in here, we don't want that much. And so we'll shake the can and open it. I just use a punch kind of can opener and pour that in and mix it all very thoroughly, being very careful because it gets quite splattery when you add the milk. So I'm going to do that step and then come back to show you putting it into the pie shell.
Okay.
Well, here we are. We're just finishing with the mixing of the canned pumpkin, the sugar and spices, the 2 eggs, and then the can of evaporated milk. So we have a nice, smooth, creamy mixture here. And now it's time to put it into our prepared pie shell. So, carefully pour. So as I said, this is a 9-inch pie. This pie plate that I used is not a very deep one. So as I suspected, I've got a little bit of pie filling left over. I don't want to go too far because I have to carry this over to the oven. So I have a little bit left, and I remember that was something that happened to my mom too. So she would just use little custard dishes or ramekins or very small casserole, and she would bake this along with the pie and have a little bit of pumpkin pudding on the side. But we are going to put this in the oven next, and this is a 425-degree oven. Pumpkin pie is a type of custard pie because of the eggs and because of the milk. And so for those, we like to initially, for 15 minutes, bake them at a very high temperature because that helps the custard set. And then after 15 minutes, we reduce the temperature to 350 for about 40 minutes. And after about 30 minutes, we start checking to see what the appearance is. And to test the doneness of a custard like this, we can take a very sharp knife tip and stick it in a couple inches from the edge and just see if it comes out mostly clean, then the custard is done. I also give the pie a little jiggle on the side, and if it still has a lot of motion, it's not quite ready. So we'll watch it carefully, and when it comes out of the oven, we'll see what we've got. Well, here we have our completed pumpkin pie. I wish you could smell it. It smells just wonderful, fresh out of the oven. This is just sort of a take on a very traditional dessert. I know there's all kinds of wonderful gourmet things being prepared by other cooks in the congregation. But you know, when I'm doing Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners, usually I'm in charge of most of it. People bring one dish or another. And so I like to have a pie that everyone enjoys, but it's very predictable. I know I can make it and it will always taste good. And so this is one of my choices. So the best thing to put on top of it is fresh whipped cream, maybe out of a can, but only if it's real whipped cream. I'm sorry I don't allow any of those artificial things like Cool Whip on my pies. I'd rather have the butter, fat, and the cream than all the chemicals that are in the artificial stuff. So we're going to enjoy this. However, as you see it here, we're cutting back on fats and things like that at our house, and it'll still be very delicious. So I hope you enjoy trying this if you do, and best of luck with your holiday baking.